There are over 110 armed conflicts taking place on the planet today. Now, these are characterized by having very large amounts of civilian casualties, a lot of infrastructure damaged, environmental issues. So it's not just the small number that we see in our news every night. There are 110 major armed conflicts taking place on the planet today. Now, these can be state-based, one country invading another. They can be civil wars. They can be drug cartels battling each other for market supremacy. But the question that we really need to ask is, why? In this development, in our humanity, do we have 110 of these conflicts going on? But now, of course, this question is not new. So basically, what we had here is that 90 years ago, basically 90 years ago right now, believe it or not, there was a conversation between Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud. Einstein asked Freud, why do we have war? And what Freud said is, well, war is inevitable. War is going to happen regardless because humans have an inherent suicide streak. They want to kill themselves, but instead of doing that, they kill other people. And believe it or not, that system of belief has been used in, for decades and decades, even though it was never proven. What's more proven and what has been researched and studied and found evidence-based again and again for the past 40 years is not that. It's actually something else. It's called the psychodynamics of large group narcissism. Now, it's just a really big name that means that if this is my community, and if you come in and you attack my community, okay, then we're going to get really, really angry. We're going to, gang up. We're going to get our resources together, and then we're going to go back and attack you with equal and opposite force. And then you're going to attack us. And so this is the logic, if you will, behind many of these serial conflicts that we have going on. And again, this research has been applied to World War I and World War II and other conflicts. Now, why is this important? This side of the polarity, if you will, says that war is inevitable, and the answer is having the bigger weapon. This side of the polarity says war is not inevitable. The solution is actually to stop this cycle of trauma. And I personally believe it's not a polarity. What we're looking at here is a continuum. And the question is, where are you on this continuum of belief? Where is your government, whatever your government happens to be, on this continuum of belief? Because that's a really integral question. When a new conflict comes in, should we send in more bombs or should we send in mediators and people who can help deal with the community trauma? That's the kind of thing that we're looking at. Now, we're going to first focus on this element that says war is inevitable, the other ones are bad. Why are we going to focus on this? Because we are subjected to this on a daily basis. Maybe this image makes sense for you. How many movies do we have? How many shows on streaming or television? It's one man against the world and battling whatever, and judged by the size of his weapon. You can phrase that however you want to, So, we just keep doing this and doing this. However, it gets really scary nowadays because when you look at the video games that our kids are playing, they're really violent. Many times. The kids are, first they start off thinking, oh, I don't want to blow the head off that person, that's mean. And then they cry, but then they get used to it, they get desensitized. And then soon it's fun to blow the heads off, characters. That matters. How we are programming our children through their programs matters. And then, of course, based on that video game, there's going to be some kind of streaming show, and then the kids identify with these problematic characters even more, even more problematic. But then, of course, we turn on the news. Some conflict has broken out someplace. Who is interviewed on the news channel? Well, it's not going to be people advocating for peace. It's going to be usually military generals who say that we need to send more war here or there. So this kind of messaging is shoved down our throats 24/7 regardless of where we live, and it does tend to come down to weapons. Now, in this weird environment, it's no surprise that from 2022 to 2023, there was a $10 billion increase in the spending on nuclear weapons. Now, of course, a lot of that came from the States, but why on earth are we investing more in nuclear weapons? So when you have this belief that war is inevitable, it's us versus them, well, these things make sense, but then, of course, what is it going to lead to? It's going to lead to trauma. Not only trauma for the people on the ground and trauma for these who are going back and forth, but also what we see obviously is that the people who sign up to go and fight in these wars often had some kind of Hollywood vision in their head about what it would be, and then they end up in a situation in which they realize, maybe I'm part of the problem. Now, I'm not saying every person who enters war, but the amount of PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, or other kinds of moral injury that happens is huge. What I can say, I come from California, and in my state, the homeless situation of veterans of wars is just out of control. Mental health issues, substance abuse issues, homelessness, and not enough support for these people. And so, but again, this is a logical, thing that would follow from this mindset. And so, of course, what else follows? Well, just more, what follows is more, conflict and more war. Now, the thing that makes it different today from in Freud's time or from in any other time is this. It is just not sustainable for our planet to go through this and to do this. Let me give you an example. We've got the military establishments all over the world, things like military bases. The United States alone has 750 military bases in 80 countries. You've got naval fleets, you've got air squadrons, you've got ammunition. When you look only at that infrastructure, not counting any guns being fired, only keeping that infrastructure working, it has been proven that adds 5.5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions that we have on the planet today. That's unacceptable. Further, when the bombs start dropping and when the guns start going off, then these numbers go through the roof. You can imagine, buildings being bombed, asbestos going everywhere, things being set on fire. However, and this is the tricky thing, the data or the numbers from the impact from war on the environment, governments do not have to share that data. In all of the major climate agreements, the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, these COP meetings that happen once a year, it's voluntary. They don't have to share it. Why? This is something that we really do need to look at as a planet. This is how war is impacting all of us. It's not over there. It is in our communities as well. Now, an area that for me is something that I have done a lot of volunteer work on is this. When you've got wars happening in specific places and the environment has been destroyed in those places, well, of course, you're going to have refugees. You're going to have people who come to other countries seeking asylum, or so-called IDPs, people who are displaced within a country. There are over 100 million people who are seen to be displaced right now. And anytime you have large numbers of people displaced through war or other situations, you know what else you're going to get? you're going to get trafficking, human trafficking. Now, this happens all across the world, and human trafficking happens right here in Austria. Human trafficking, Austria can be a hub because of its geographical location. It can also be a destination point. So the thing is that all of the things that we have just seen here follow logically from this idea that, well, war is inevitable, let's get the biggest gun, and it's us versus them. And what that leads to is, indeed, a self-fulfilling prophecy. War is inevitable if you take this perspective. But you know what? I think that's unacceptable, and I think that Freud was wrong. Well, it has been proven wrong by the data here. I started thinking about these kinds of things, I would say 30 years ago, maybe 40 years ago. That's how old I am. I lived in Tokyo for 12 years. And during that time, I had the honor of getting to know some atomic bomb survivors. And my question to them was, how did you survive emotionally in this when everything that you knew somehow was just gone? I mean, they didn't know what a nuclear weapon was. And then I started also asking, what do you think we need to do as people in order to make this violence stop? So I interviewed many there, then I interviewed Holocaust witnesses, I've interviewed, here in Austria, I've interviewed people who came, in that wave from Syria, for example. A young woman who was on one of those boats, but then the boat was sunk by the traffickers. Almost 500 people died. She was one of the only people who survived. How does she process all of this stuff? Another person, for example, an amazing young Ugandan woman who thought she was leaving a war zone and coming to get an education, but actually she was thrown into sex trafficking in Europe, and amazingly somehow was able to escape that. And so with all of these different people, with all of these different stories, I've always asked that same question. What can we do now? What is the solution? Now, of course, many people have very different ideas, but there's one thing that everybody has said, and that is this. It's connection. The more that we make connections, the less likely it is that we will fall into these traps of war. Now, what does that look like? Well, we made some connections here, looking at what leads to war and what some of the implications are. But it also has to do with, if this is the person I'm supposed to be fighting with, well, let's just talk and see, is there anything that we can agree on? Is there any level that we can see each other as humans? And this is how that idea connects to what we had discussed at the very beginning with this whole psychodynamic of war. Because it really does come down to the question, when a conflict comes up, should we send in negotiators and mediators? Should we send in resources to the people on the ground so they have food? Should we send in community therapists to help them deal with the trauma? Or should we just bomb them? That is ultimately what it kind of comes down to these days. I know I'm making it simplistic, but nonetheless, think of this when you're watching the news with the latest issue about whatever, and just think, is that actually going to make the situation better, or will this perpetuate a cycle of violence? Now, in closing, I want to look at one thing. Many of us will say, okay, well, I want peace, but there's nothing I can do. But keep in mind, you're one of those. When one person takes action, and action can even just changing your mind about something, it can be that. When one person takes action, it really does impact the rest of the collective society, if you will. And I want to give you a really amazing example that is happening right now. I don't know if you've heard of a place called Uvalde, Texas. You might have heard of it 2 years ago, because this was the site of yet another school shooting in the United States. Now, the official story you might have heard is some young guy came into an elementary school with some kind of machine-grade weapon, killed 21 people. And the story that we heard afterwards in the news in the States is, well, the police did not do a good job of stopping him. Okay, well, that is part of the story. But what's interesting is the parents of the 19 children who were killed. It was 19 children and 2 teachers who were killed that day. The parents of those kids got together and they said, no, that's not the story. The story is far more profound. Because it turns out that the guy, the token gunman, when he was 15 years old, he was kind of socially vulnerable. And when he was 15 years old, he started really playing with earnest this video series game called Call of Duty. It's a military kind of based game. And he really got into it. And then he also liked Instagram. And so Instagram's algorithm told the weapons manufacturer that makes this kind of rifle, it's an AR-15 that is used in the game, it started sending this kid ads saying, hey, you know, we sell AR-15s somehow because of the algorithm here. And so what the parents are saying is, it's not an accident that this happened. These factors came together. This kid was groomed to do this. And then they basically they facilitated his buying this weapon. And so just a couple of months ago, these parents got together and they're putting together a class action lawsuit with 3 entities that are being sued. One is the Call of Duty video game maker for making the game allegedly addictive. 2, it is the weapons manufacturer that sold the kid the gun and also, you know, promoted the kid to buy the gun. And 3, it's Meta, who owns Instagram. And they're saying, you 3 went together and you set up this situation for this kid to buy the gun and go do this, and you need to be held accountable. Now, I think it's a very interesting lawsuit for many reasons. We will see what happens. But if any of these entities are found guilty, that has profound implications even right here in beautiful Innsbruck. Because thank goodness, you know, people cannot buy guns with the, you know, readiness that they can in the States. But how many kids who are socially vulnerable are learning that kind of value system and they don't have the ability to see you know, right or wrong in this situation. So basically, we've taken a tour of many of these issues, but you know what? It really just comes down to 2 questions. When we look at this continuum, I would like to call it, war is inevitable, biggest gun, us versus them, or war is not inevitable. Healing is a really important part of the process, and we need to give resources to that. Where are you in your belief system? Where are you? And then the second question is, what are you willing to do this week, today, to move closer to the side of healing for yourself, for your community, and indeed for the planet? Thank you.